All right, let's start with the big story that we're tracking on WION at this hour, where in its first reaction to India's ASAT test, Russia has said that India's action is essentially a result of the degraded situation in the field of arms control. Now, in its carefully crafted response, Russia has directly put the blame on its arch-rival, the United States, for spearheading the weaponization of space and also for spearheading the weapons race by undermining the entire architecture of international security and strategic stability. Now, it slammed Washington by asking it, and I quote here, to take a responsible stand, come to its senses, and also drop the insane and the idea of universal military domination. So very strong words there having been used Russia in its statement. Russia has also called for international multilateral legally binding instruments to keep the outer space peaceful, offering India to actively join these joint efforts of the international community. Now, India is the fourth nation in the world to have anti-satellite missiles. Previously, only the United States, Russia and China were the only countries to have tested an ASAT weapon.
Technology of the future, BMD interceptor. India has achieved crucial technology in space.
All right, now to add more perspective to the story, we are joined in by my colleague Siddhant Sibil, who is joining us live from New Delhi. Good morning to you, Siddhant. This is an interesting statement that has been given by Russia, where they have said that India should in fact join the international community in preventing an arms race into space. But at the same time, they've taken some clear pot shots at the United States for having withdrawn from the INF.
Well, Mohammed, there are three parts to the big statement issued by Moscow. First, of course, welcoming what New Delhi has, the reassurance given by New Delhi on making sure that outer space remains an area free of weapons of mass destruction. Second, of course, the pot shots taken against Washington, and that line is, of course, not only strong, but a big line taking a clear pot shot against Washington, clearly saying that Washington is responsible for the degraded situation which is currently being seen in the global arms race. And thirdly, the joint Chinese and Russian initiative on a treaty which calls for outer space free from weapons of mass destruction. But clearly, it's Washington at the heart of the entire statement. Russia has said that because Washington is clearly racing in this arms race. We also know that last year, US President Donald Trump said that there will be a force, the sixth arm of the US military that will guard the space. This will be separate but equal to the US Air Force. So clearly, US President Donald Trump calling for this big development will, of course, move both Beijing and Moscow. But clearly, if you look at the statements coming, this is the fourth statement after the Indian test. First, of course, by Pakistanis, then Chinese, then US, and now Russia. Of course, Russia and Washington, I will treat as positive statement when it comes to New Delhi. Both are partners of New Delhi, but a cautious statement coming from China. And of course, unexpected line, we all know what Pakistanis had to say, and of course, what they came and clearly their statement criticizing the move by New Delhi.
Absolutely, indeed. Now, Pakistan really has no role in this because they don't even have a satellite in space, but it is the United States, Russia and China. These are the other three nations that have the capability, and the statements that they have now put forth essentially are an acknowledgement that India is also a nation which has weapons which can actually strike down satellites in space. So effectively, this is an acknowledgement by these three nations of India having joined the elite club.
Well, of course, it's an acknowledgement, and the statement have been issued by all three countries who are the only countries who have this technology. India becomes the fourth country to have this technology, and all the statements are by and large positive or guarded. Even by the Chinese, the statement is pretty much guarded statement, but a welcoming move by both Russia and Washington. Russia, of course, welcoming the assurances given by New Delhi. Remember, in the aftermath of the test which were announced by the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, all the P5 envoys here in New Delhi were call to the MEA, and they were briefed about how the tests are basically deterrence and India is not indulging in any kind of arms race in the outer space. It's a long-standing policy of the Indian government that the outer space should remain free from any of the weapons of mass destruction. Also on the debris, because that was one of the concerns of the global community. New Delhi has clarified. In fact, the Indian finance minister on the day itself, he did a presser. He said the debris will decay in just 3 weeks, and since it was done in lower atmosphere, there won't be much debris, because that remains a major issue, especially after the Chinese did the test. There were major concerns regarding debris. So in this case, India made sure that it does the test, make sure that the world knows it has the technology, and also there are no negative impacts in the environment in the aftermath of the test done by New Delhi.
Absolutely indeed. We'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed, Siddhant Sibil, for joining us and getting us that perspective of all three of these nations that already had these anti-satellite missiles, now acknowledging the fact that India has also joined this elite club. Now, India's successful test of the anti-satellite missile has certainly made its neighbours green with a bit of envy. China in particular, the Chinese Foreign Ministry's statement after India's achievement was benign to say the least. Also, China is not exactly in a good mood when it comes to talking about rockets. Its own private space industry has failed to launch yet again. More in this report.
While these rockets, many of them made in China, fly up successfully, a new rocket made in China failed in its bid to launch into orbit. Beijing-based space firm OneSpace's launch encountered an anomaly within 10 seconds after its OS-M1 rocket blasted off. The four-stage rocket lost control within a minute of takeoff shortly after the first stage separation. OneSpace failed to become China's first private launch firm to launch a satellite into orbit. It was the second setback for China's private space industry within 5 months. A three-stage rocket from another Beijing-based space firm, Landspace, failed at the third stage in the month of October last year. China's government has been calling for private capital investment in the space sector since the year 2014, but so far no company has been able to launch a rocket into orbit. Still, companies are queuing up to enter the launch market for commercial satellites. While it is still in its early stages, space firms are getting funding and government support, just like the way it works in the US, Japan and France. The push by private Chinese firms to send a payload into orbit is partly inspired by the recent technological success of US firms like SpaceX and Blue Origin. China's President Xi Jinping had made becoming a spaceflight superpower a priority when he took office in 2012, and he aims to send a permanent manned space station into orbit by the year 2022. But his near-term task is to develop major satellite systems for remote sensing, communications and broadcasting, and navigation and positioning. And to that end, India's Mission Shakti, that successfully tested an interceptor missile meant to bust spy satellites, is an indication that India is technologically keeping pace with China in space. But in India right now, only government entities have a hold over the space sector. Private companies merely supply parts and components or manufacture subsystems for satellites. Some private companies use the government's space infrastructure to provide services to consumers. The government is promoting private investments in the space sector through its Make in India program. The Indian Space Research Organization, or ISRO, has been collaborating with the private sector increasingly to overcome manpower and budgetary constraints. Bureau Report.